So, what are we really talking about when we're talking about ascension? Or when we talk about consciousness? Or when people are talking about aliens or different dimensions? What are we really talking about when we're talking about ascension? When we're talking about enlightenment? When we're talking about nirvana? When we're talking about all these many different ways of talking about utopia, illumination, ascension, planetary ascension, personal ascension. You're going to go back to enlightenment. Let's call it enlightenment for now. So I think that's a little bit more, people sort of, you might have a concept of what that means. So, I don't know, but you might have a concept of what enlightenment is, but I'm not sure if you would necessarily know to, at least within my paradigm. And everyone's lens is different. This is just my lens. Everyone else has their own truth. If what I'm saying resonates with you, then it might be part of your truth too. If it doesn't resonate with you, then it's probably not part of your truth. And that's okay, because we're all different. And that's what I want to get to. So what is enlightenment and what is an ascension? So I think I want to point out that for a very long time, the people who talk about these concepts are people who have been placed into positions of high regard, maybe within religious organizations such as churches, or they're elevated as clergy or prophets, or they're represented through these legends involving prophets and very spiritual people who dedicated their life to thinking about God, or maybe, usually, I'm saying this is like maybe what your impression might be. This is maybe what mine was, similar to. So usually, you might even think that these, usually you might associate people who talk about enlightenment with people who are religious. If you're a person who does not believe in God, or who does not relate to spirituality, then you automatically, possibly, discount this concept. You might have knowledge that gives you information that seems to offer an explanation for why people would be talking about things like enlightenment or religious awakenings, spiritual awakenings, and it might be attributed more to something to do with resourcing in the brain, or resiliency, or reactions towards trauma. In psychology, you go to when people experience trauma, people often in the field of psychology, that, or we talk about it as people often might seek sources that might give them explanations or give them comfort during these times. And these organizations, which are churches or like religious organizations, also provide community and other things which also help would help with trauma. So it makes sense that people would associate and kind of like naturally would like funnel back into these channels where they, of their culture, in times of crisis. So, you also might get the impression that people who talk about concepts like enlightenment and spiritual awakenings might just not be educated about science and Western science. Might have grown up in a culture where there was not an education system that talked about these things. A lot of people go to schools where we teach science in such a manner that public education cuts off where we teach when it gets to the stuff that we know about how the quantum works. So it's like, in spite of the fact that science has been trying to grapple with these questions of inexplicable properties of matter, wherein things happen, such as like an electron can be in two places at once at the same time, which you look at all of the science that we teach, it's useful, but we don't get to the part where we say, but all that stuff has an underlay of something that negates everything that you've ever learned. Especially if you grow up in a culture or a society where religious beliefs or spirituality is kept separate from conversations around science and history. Beliefs, these basic questions around like the meaning of life, or is there, what happens to you after you die? Do we die? Is there death? Those types of things. We, and I mean like westernized education in science, boxes up anything that negates the rest of what we teach. So you might occasionally hear about, your education might be peppered with a few like little interesting anomalies, stories about near-death experiences that people can't really explain, even the doctor can't explain it, or there'll be certain things that might seem more compelling to you than others, but there will have been just little things here and there along the way that say, well, this is weird, but we're just gonna not. People who see spirits or who experience psychic phenomena are experiencing something like a hallucination, supposedly. These are the things that you'll hear, like a little, like an interesting story, and then you're fed back. But it's probably this. But it's probably this. But it's probably this. But isn't it interesting that the only things that science studies are the things that people pay for science to study. So any one of those people reporting an individual experience, an unexplained phenomena, they're doing science. They're making an observation and contrasting it with the rest of their life and saying, this is an anomaly. I saw a spaceship flying through the air. I saw this happen to me. I experienced a flash of light when there shouldn't have been. I experienced a ghost. I experienced hovering over my body when I was on the operating table. I experienced the Elysian fields after I died in a car accident, and then I was brought back to life, and I didn't want to be here. These things happen. People report these things as happening. And they're being scientists. There's something called the scientific method, but there's also the origin of science has always been experience and observation. And with that, you have to have some creativity of thought, the willingness to look at these phenomena and recognize that nobody studies them, nobody credible. I mean, there's a lot of credibility to the people who do study it. However, according to maybe like the westernized canon, it doesn't match up to the big bucks that a major university will pay to study something that the major university's benefactor has an interest in them studying. Or even just what's the trendy thing to be studying right now. You don't just get to go to school and study anything you want to study. That's not how it works. It's not how it works. You have to pick something to study that a university will want to fund, or a college will want to fund, which means that they have to have an idea of whether it fits into what they're putting out as the research about that school or on behalf of that institution. So there's not really a good setup for, and there's privately funded research as well, but I think what I'm more saying, I'm not trying to necessarily focus on tearing all that down, but I am trying to point out that there are lots of things that people experience that actually don't ever get studied, and nobody bothers to stop and think about it. Like, stop and think about, or give credit to, give consciousness to, and pay attention to the things in your life that don't really add up sometimes. Stuff like deja vu. That's when, nobody, quote unquote, can explain that in Western medicine, in psychology. There's not an explanation. That's a major thing that everybody experiences. It's a little major thing. And have you ever had the kind where it's deja vu, but you actually can consciously say in your head or out like what's about to happen? Because I've had that happen, where I was like, oh my gosh, my mom, I'm having that feeling again, and then, oh, my mom's about to say this, and then she said it just out of the blue, and it was just a random remark. Things like that just aren't really explainable. And yeah, it's silly. So you just put it in your, you either forget about it, or if you're like me, you put it in your little, teeny little box of okay, this has never made any sense. I've never found an explanation for how this could happen. And you let it ride. And then you get to be a certain age and you don't think that anything's ever really going to explain these things. Maybe you just imagined it. Maybe you're just in tune with what's happening and have a connection with mom in that way. Maybe. Okay, so back to enlightenment or ascension. So what are we really talking about here? So consciousness is something that we all have, whether or not we identify as spiritual or religious or not. We all, well, I'm not sure if everybody has consciousness at this point, but in theory, like our species, no, I'm kidding, we all have consciousness. We all have consciousness. Consciousness is a quality of the energy of your body. So what happens is the earth turns out stuff and stuff and stuff, and eventually the stuff turns into humans, and humans get to be one of the more conscious beings that exist on the earth as part of the earth and process the matter of the earth for it and process other energetic byproducts of the ongoing reaction that is the dipole moment, the dipole reaction. There's a dipole moment coming. The dipole reaction of our planet. See other video about dipoles and why you care. Our planet has two poles because it is a dipole, which means that there's an electric current that circulates. And as an electric current circulates, it gets faster and faster and hotter and hotter. Okay, that's the other video. You can go watch that. Humans are on the planet as one of the many species who process the earth. We are the earth. We are the earth processing itself, processing its matter, processing its cellular memory, which is passed down through the mitochondrial DNA. Humans take the cellular memory and process and process and process it. And we create new humans to hopefully keep raising the vibration, matching the raising vibration of the planet, raising vibration of the planet. But humans are meant to be at the cusp of that. So we process what comes out of the earth, the earth's magnetic field. We interact with it and we calibrate. We process, we calibrate different energies that are in the field through our bodies. Some of this we identify, some of this is like just emotions that we feel from experiences that we are having. That's processing an archetype of an energy on behalf of the earth. And through the experiences that we have and the emotions that we experience and what we put back out from what we take in, the earth continues to raise its consciousness as a being. The earth is a being, it's a living being. And we're just part of one living being. We don't live on the earth. We are the earth. Just like this cell right here in my palm, if we zoomed in on that cell and gave an interview, that cell would say, no, I don't live on this human. I am part of this human. I am this human. This is the same as we are with the earth. Or if you zoom inside the cell and look at its constituent parts, none of those little pieces and little blobbly things would say, oh, I just live here. I can't wait to get out of here someday. I'm gonna go live in another universe. Like, can you imagine? First you have to be able to imagine yourselves being able to talk, which they basically can, but we just don't like talk to them that much. We don't talk to them as much as we should. So what is consciousness? What is enlightenment? What is ascension? So for a long time, humans have been living here, and there have been certain types of people who gravitate more towards the types of practices or the types of lifestyle, the ways of thinking, and also they would have probably, in a lot of situations, grown up in a system that somehow fostered in them a deep sense of spirituality. And those people are the people who start talking about enlightenment, nirvana. All it's those type of people who are the ones who start talking about it. But go back to the beginning, because I just gave you a set of conditions as to why certain types of people are more likely than others to be the ones who do certain things and live certain ways and have the types of experiences that would lead them to this very heightened relationship with their spirituality and this heightened level of consciousness, which is referred to as enlightenment. So, what I'm saying, I'm trying to get at, there is something that humans can do, that the human nervous system is designed to do, designed to be able to transcend itself and get to another developmental level that basically enormously magnifies any of your abilities or your capacities for learning, your capacity for healing, your capacity for making your life look the way you want it to look the way that would make you happy. Capacities for overcoming the sense that we are victims of our emotions, the sense that emotions are something that we need to avoid, overcoming the torture, which is experiencing emotions when you are a person who grew up in a society that tells you we do not feel that. We don't feel sad. We don't feel mad. Let's get up. Let's get up. No tears. Let's be a big boy. You know how it is. Yeah, you do. torture to try to feel your feelings when you've been trained your whole life not to feel them. But guess what? Our purpose on this planet has to do with having experience, feeling feelings, and that contributes to, depending on our level of consciousness, that contributes, vastly contributes to us calibrating, like literally, the electromagnetic field of the planet. Because we're all hooked in. We are hooked into the the planet has an electromagnetic field, and we are hooked in. In the West, we talk a lot about gravity for some reason, but gravity is just another way of talking about what's happening with the dipole reaction of the planet. And it really leaves out a lot, because humans, and others, we don't just stand because we learn to balance using gravity. That's not how it works. And I think I said this somewhere else, but that's not how it works. We use the electromagnetic field to energetically balance and be able to coordinate our movements. It's magnetism at every level. This is not just nothing. This air is not just nothing. There are different frequencies of energy. And there's energy, everything is energy, including this air. It's just a different frequency. We tap into it. And yes, there's gravity that like holds us, but like, I just feel like that kind of miscommunicates the fact that it's really, we're magnetized here, and we learn to, and we calibrate to, and entrain to the electromagnetic field. And that's how we stand up in balance and learn to walk, is through entrainment with the electromagnetic field. So, in the field of the planet, there are even different, a vast spectrum of different frequencies. So, as the planet gets, as that dipole reaction keeps going, it gets hotter and hotter and faster and faster. And the planet's field gets stronger and stronger as it gets faster and faster. So we have higher and higher frequency on the outside, which makes it stronger and stronger. And it has a greater pull. And the pull is on both the planet and it's on us. Which means that it actually as that happens, it accelerates. So the human body, likewise, has its own electromagnetic field associated with it. We're not just little bubbles. We are interacting. Everything is fields interacting with each other. And everything that you sense as like a tangible experience is something like a hallucination. It's like a generated experience. So, there's nobody saying you're good and you're bad. That's right and that's wrong. There's not like a, well, at least in my version, there's not really a man in the sky with a big white beard who's saying this is right and this is wrong. It's kind of a misinterpretation of, never really made any sense. And so I threw it out like after I was like 6 or whatever age, where I realized that everyone was talking about science, and I didn't understand why we were going to pretend like God made any sense. And so I always, like, which I think a lot of people maybe do this, just go to church and don't believe, like, think of themselves as like believing in God, or even like in their heads might think they're an atheist, or they hate going, or you know, any number of things. Luckily, I didn't go to a fire and brimstone type place, so it was just something kind of peaceful, but I mean, it just seemed like you could find a more useful way to talk about important issues to me, to be honest. That's what it felt. That's what I felt growing up. But what is happening is that as generations and generations of humans process more and more energy into more and more conscious energy, humans get more conscious, the planet gets more conscious, which is the electromagnetic field getting stronger and bigger. As that reaction of the dipole of the planet keeps going, the electromagnetic field gets bigger and stronger and more conscious. That is consciousness evolving. So the higher the frequency of the field, if you zoom in and look at certain densities of energy, and if you look at the densities that include Earth life, you see a spectrum of where the energy, where you can identify a spectrum of consciousness, such that from our perspective as humans, within the context of everything that we identify as knowing, there's a lot. Yeah. Humans we think that, I mean, it's not we think that, it's just that, like, it works such that, like, history continues to evolve and the conscious experience of the earth evolves with it. And so there are certain people who've talked about this for all of time, and every single religion has talked about the same stuff. They just use a different lens. Talking about the consciousness of the planet evolving and how humans are on the cusp of consciousness, but that humans ourselves, within our lifetime, you have the ability to raise your own consciousness to a high enough level such that you can interact with both the collective consciousness and down in the 3D. It's not down. We need to stop saying that. I need to not say that. But in the 3D, because it's not down, there's not down and up and stuff like that. Not really. I mean, not in the, I think that, like, you can use it as a euphemism, but I don't want to use those terms when I'm trying to be, like, relatively realistic about what I'm trying to talk about this topic that people don't really talk about. Yeah, but so as a human, so what has happened is that there have been spiritual leaders who have achieved things like enlightenment and then become spiritual leaders, or the other way around, or different people throughout time who talk about this, like talk about having an awakening or a rebirth, or, you know, different types of things. And what's happened is that those people have actually had the energy of their being, of the conscious energy of their being, jump and accelerate and expand such that they have such a different level of consciousness that they can actually, they feel, and they are, and people are collected or connected in with something that's called like the collective unconscious, where within the system of yourself, you can access basically like all the wisdom of all the ages and whatever you want to say. Whatever. It's hard to, I mean, that's the part that's like, you know, you have to find out what it is for yourself. Because I started out this video talking about how there is this huge discrepancy, or maybe like mistranslation, miscommunication for a really long time, because the people who had this happen, or who were able to work on getting this to happen for themselves, were these people who identified with usually, or they might have come up with, or invented, or channeled, founded a new religious faith, a religion or a religious faith. So these people are from certain religions. So when they become enlightened, their enlightenment sounds a lot like the systems that they were already in. Sounds a lot like the culture that they were already in. Especially if you grew up within a system that already more closely honored the spiritual nature of the teachings of the religion that you practiced in, rather than emphasizing checking boxes and judgment. Because most religions have like the core and the heart of the teachings, which is the spiritual, which is somebody's spiritual perspective on how to achieve enlightenment usually, or somebody who has become enlightened and then has a lot to say about how we can live better lives. That might be those, so either one of those things could be the core of these teachings. But then layered onto that, there's just history and culture and race and I want to say don't get me started on gender, but I'm started on gender and sex and sexuality and sexual orientation. We're started on it, but we'll talk about that in another one. But all this stuff is layered on in religious perspectives. All these differences and all these just any possible aspect of who or how a person or a community or a society could be. Those are layered, those are all built into any of the conceptions of what enlightenment or ascension or spiritual awakening has always been thought, has always been taught, I guess. What am I trying to say? What we've always been taught, we, to include myself and anybody else who wants to be part of we, or who identifies as part of we. But here's the thing, see, like, there's nothing actually there isn't that much that's that different about those people who have had that happen, except that they had those kinds of experiences and had the kind of culture that would lead them to have an awakening and then talk about it, and then talk about it in a certain way using a certain framework. So there's like this Christian philosopher named Marcus Borg, who died just a couple years ago, I think. And he wrote a lot of really, did I say Christmas or Christian? He's like a Jesus scholar, I think at Oxford. And wrote a lot of books about kind of re-examining the Bible and Jesus and things like that. I'm not claiming to be an expert, but I like one of his main teachings is that he is trying to point out that Christianity is just one way of relating to God. Christianity and Jesus are just one way of relating to God. And he says, I'm a Christian. He says, I am a Christian. However, I want people to consider that if God is all-powerful and all-knowing and all-creative, why would he only invent one singular solitary manner of getting to know him? Why wouldn't there be more than one way of knowing him? Why wouldn't he have more than one love language? Have we all learned now that there are not just 5 love languages? Of course, there are not 5 love languages. That's like a really lovely, but the point is about not identifying and fragmenting the languages of love, or the languages through which we talk about enlightenment and ascension and awakening. We fragment it when we talk about it in the context of religions, and when we start saying this religion is right and that religion is wrong. Y'all are right and they're wrong. They do it right, they do it wrong. They're going to hell, they're okay. We fragment it when we do that. Instead, because what we're doing is we're focusing on difference in such a way that it heightens our fear. We're focusing on difference as a manner of judging. We're focusing on the contrast between the fragments of the love languages, the many infinite love languages of God. We're talking about the fragmented love languages and the contrast between those. And what happens is the bits of consciousness that end up in those fragmentations forget to focus on the original source of the language itself, the love language itself. Love, God, source, spirit, high frequency electromagnetic field, part of the field, consciousness. The original source of those languages of love is the highest level of consciousness, the highest level of conscious energy that makes up our energy field, which is equivalent to, or the level at which we become enlightened, if we can get our consciousness there, is the level of love that corresponds to the vibrational frequency of love. If you exist and view the world within that paradigm, and you completely calibrate your system such that it exclusively does that all the time, you will blow your nervous system out of the water, and you will suddenly be able to see, you will suddenly have a whole new take on everything. And if you are, a lot of people down here at these little bits of, these are like religions and churches and individuals who assert religious views and spiritual views, but aren't really recognizing the original intention of the language, and instead get fixated on right where they are in this fragmentation. And then what do they see? Because, see, they're kind of nearsighted. What do they see? all they see like, oh, there's darkness between me and this other fragmentation. So those Presbyterians over there, they're probably going to hell. But we're okay. These Presbyterians over here, because we broke off from the big church. And then you have other fragmentations within. Sometimes you get so nearsighted that then it's like keeps fragmenting and fragmenting. But what's constant is that there was always this original thing that all of these languages were talking about. And it doesn't have to be a religion. So that's this whole thing that I'm trying to get to. It doesn't have to be. A religion is not the only way of talking about God. Spirituality as a word, you don't have to be a person who wants to use that word to be a person who can experience enlightenment. This hair, I can't figure out where it is. That doesn't have to resonate with you. You can be a person who for 35 years of your life has been an atheist. And you can be a person who has not really changed their mind about any of their prior views. You've just added on more that actually explain a lot of the stuff that you've seen. And that's part of the trick. They tell you that if you're a person who likes science and academia, westernized academia, that you're not going to relate to the people who talk about God and consciousness and enlightenment. And that those people are either religious freaks or hippies. They're doing drugs. It's the drugs. They tell you you're either going to be other if you go and try to talk about this level of consciousness that is a physiological adaptation of the earth for humans in our bodies, a physiological adaptation of humans, our nervous system, that we can blow the cork off of our consciousness. Just like if you've ever watched a child grow up, or a child goes through different levels of development where suddenly the child realizes, oh, other people exist. And they start saying, I and you, or start calling names. Or they start referring to themselves, they start using I and me instead of third person. They go through that throughout our development, we're always raising our consciousness. The vibration of our energy field is getting raised throughout our development. And there are certain leaps. And in development, if you are a person who's had a baby in a very westernized kind of way, they talk a lot about leaps in development, which are these, in psychology, we call them like a critical period, during which if certain factors happen, like if these certain things are in place, such as love and support and nourishment, then the being has the potential to leap up to a new level of development and start looking at things in a different way. And if you've ever actually been around a child, it is like a stark difference between, it's like, whoa, this is like a different kid. You'll see their whole framework for how they view the world change suddenly. And sometimes, and earlier on, it's like the sensory stuff, like babies cannot perceive a certain type of depth until a certain age, and then it's just like a black and white flip, or object permanence, which is the flip when you have an object and you hold it up to a baby, and the baby's looking at the object, and then hide it. The reason that playing peekaboo with the baby is because to a baby, if I can't see it, it doesn't exist anymore. And so for you to pull it back out, that is a total magic trick to them. It is incredible. And then overnight, they get something called object permanence, which means that in their brain, they can keep this as a permanent object, even though they're watching me, it goes away, it goes out of their sight. In their brain, it's still a permanent object, so it's not going to be that surprising or that funny anymore, Mom, when you then pull it back out. And this is just like an overnight flip. And this is their consciousness. This is one way to recognize, one way to talk about our consciousness being raised. So throughout development, there are different leaps. And people do not stop developing after their teenage years. This is extremely disturbing that we are perpetuating this. Extremely disturbing. Your consciousness, your being is capable of all those same things that people like the Dalai Lama have been talking about, Jesus, everybody, anyone who's ever come back from a coma and had like suddenly gained a new language. Those types of things are cognitive adaptations to the way, and they are indications of us wiring to the quantum field of our planetary field at large in a certain way such that we have access to information such as an entire language in some cases. Because if your cells carry memory from ancestors who might have had that language, you might be nearby certain kind of energy webs, fields that contain those frequencies. And so that's where you get weird, like crazy flukes like that just like nobody explains, and then nobody says like, well, this kind of negates the fact that this happened, makes everything else like, what are we doing? Yeah, you do not have to be religious to have an awakening, and your awakening, and this is another thing, gurus and people, this is like this term that people use to talk about people who teach about enlightenment. So different gurus or clergy or people like that are going to tell you that it looks that being enlightened and being at a level of Christ consciousness or Krishna consciousness is going to look a certain way. You're going to think these certain things, you're going to feel these certain things, you're going to do these certain things, you're going to act this certain way. You won't have this interest anymore. You won't like that anymore. You won't like that anymore. You won't like that. Go to any single person who's ever said that they are enlightened or who's reported an experience of enlightenment, a Kundalini awakening. That's this type of energy that you can get flowing, and it gets your consciousness, your conscious energy into like hyperdrive. And then you have to consolidate all that, and your body has to calibrate to it. And some people, like, it happens due to trauma. It happens for a lot of reasons, not just meditating and stuff. You can have it happen due to trauma, or a lifetime of trauma. But unless you're a person who's, like, I'm a person who's studied psychology. I have a background in trauma, background in working with clients with abuse, histories of abuse and dissociative disorders, and I have a lifetime of just being interested in sort of, even though I identified with a very westernized way of looking at the world, medicalized way of looking at things, pathologizing way of looking at things, which is what we're taught, and then some of us double down on it, a pathologizing way of looking. And I tended to be a therapist who doesn't want to diagnose anyway. But even now, I was still way too pathologizing, even though I was maybe one of the most accepting and like therapists that I know in terms of honoring people's own individuality and their experience and their own expertise on their lives, which is what we're supposed to be doing as therapists, by the way, is honoring people's individual experience and what individually makes them happy and what gives them meaning, what gives them quality of life. But, hey, could you sit down? But I had a background in all these things that when I started having experiences of the experience of a spiritual awakening, which happened over a long time, starting around the time of childbirth, when I gave birth to my son, it was during that time that I first started experiencing life in a different way, and I now understand that to be that my consciousness was fundamentally changed at that point. And then I had had multiple major traumas and then significant heavy impact traumas at sensitive times that gave me that and during which my nervous system it's like you have an overabundance of flow all of a sudden, and the charge just overwhelms you. It kind of like almost like restarts your nervous system. It's like a psychic death. So I feel like I've had where you don't die, but you have your nervous system just completely overhaul, and it feels like there's like a reset. It's like a hard reset of your nervous system, not like going to sleep. Like all of a sudden it's like you're reset. And this happens for people who this is like called a Kundalini awakening. It's called any of these other things that I've talked about, but it happens a lot with people in trauma, and because those same people who have trauma think that you're supposed to go to a therapist looks at those experiences and they see those as things that we need to soothe or that we need to eliminate or take care of, when in reality what we really need to do is help support people and help them to calibrate and be able to take in these new levels of consciousness which they have been able to achieve. Help them learn to live with that and help them adapt to it. Give them the skills to be able to give them the framework to be able to understand and be able to identify what's happened to them. Because for a lot of people in the West, the only thing that this feels like is crazy is something we call crazy. It feels like, you just like completely gone off the deep end, because you don't hear other people talking about these things. You don't hear other people talking about these experiences. At least not as much as you would if you grew up in a culture where there is an acceptance and recognition of the fact that our nervous system can do this. And in a lot of these cultures, the culture itself helps foster the individuals to achieve these higher levels of consciousness. So neurologically, this means that your neurons are just firing at a much more rapid pace. It means that there are two hemispheres of your brain, and it means that instead of them having to pass back and forth, pass the information back and forth through this one little part called in the middle, this tiny little bridge, you've calibrated it so that instead of your brain having this kind of energetic motion, you get a like if you, maybe one's going backwards, but you get an exponential increase to the energy that is generated and that you have access to and can use, and the energetic pathways, the neural pathways, and this goes throughout your whole body. It's not just your brain is not the center of everything. It's your heart, and I mean your brain, yes, and your whole nervous system, but every part of your body is precious. There's no part of your body that is not precious, and it's all conscious. Yeah, but there are different tools that are available to anybody to be able to do this. And from where I sit, I see a society in which like nobody even really knows that this is possible. And this is not something that you should have to have trauma to experience. To have trauma, and then people get medicated out of their like newly superhuman state. We medicate people away from it because we don't have a framework that understands spirituality, or that like even recognizes that there's something more to us than just goop and some calcium. Since we don't have, and when I say we don't have a framework, I mean socially we don't talk about these things. In my culture, you go to church, but you don't actually talk about your connection and really how you actually relate to spirit and or God. People talk a lot about like what it seems like God says, what it seems like God should say, what it seems like God would say. But most of those people are not actually connecting to spirit. And I'm not saying that they're not like good intentioned and that there aren't some good lessons that are taught in pretty much any paradigm. And that's the whole point. You don't have to throw all of it out. You don't have to have any of it. Because the reason that all these people say slightly different things and talk about these things is because we are all so infinitesimally individualized and different from each other. Our energetic systems have memory that's passed down, and it's all very individualized. It's not just like your genes dictate what color your eyes are, and that's just like a color thing. It's just like a physical thing. That's not, and then you have conditions and experiences, and that gives you your memories and things like that. No, it's not just all that, and it's not just about like, not just instincts. There's much more to it than all that. We are these living webs of so many different fields of energy that are passed to us, that we embody when we come into this experience as a human. We are so individualized. When you reach enlightenment, when you reach that vibrational level, the level of consciousness, of love, peace. I'm picturing the scale. There's a, look up David Hawkins' levels of consciousness. But when you reach, he kind of channeled a scale of this, and it's really lovely. I'm saying channeled. I don't think he uses that word. But we have to stop like throwing people out who don't have very specific types of backgrounds in science. That's what I'm saying. Because a scientist can look at certain things and recognize, okay, well, this seems true too. This is true, or this like really resonates as true. So once you get to, but going back to our scale, once you get to that level of love, I it is my understanding and my experience and my fundamental belief that you do not have to, not everybody is going to shed their ego in such a way that your personality and your preferences dissipate. That is not true. That is not universal. I think for many people, this might be true. And I posit that maybe these people for whom this is true happen to also be the subset of the population who are the more aesthetic, hermetic, i.e. isolating and spiritual, mystical type of part of the, part of the population anyway. And so when they do become enlightened, they become a more exaggerated version of that. And a lot of these people, most of these people are men. Most of these people are men. I'm not gonna cut corners here. Most of these people are men. I'm not sure, and I have a lot to say about sex and gender and sexuality and sexual orientation and all those things, which is basically that none of it's real. But for the purpose of this talk, most of the people who say that when you reach enlightenment, you have to have lost your ego, and if you lose your ego, it means you lose your sex drive, you lose your interest in having relationships, you lose your interest in worldly things such as food and just different earthly kind of pleasures and things like that. A lot of those people, they say when you hit enlightenment, you lose all of that stuff. That's true for those people, if they say it's true. And they're coming from a good place when they're trying to teach about their experience. But what they're not recognizing is that just because a lot of other people have had awakenings where they lose attachments to frequencies that included manifestations such as sex and relationships, doesn't mean that doesn't mean that everybody's enlightenment is going to look like that. What that means is that what you shed are the lower energy fields, the lower energy fields, the lower frequency energy fields within the broader energy field that makes up your being, which includes your physical self. You shed the parts of you that are the lower frequency parts of you, the parts of you that are associated with and entrained with fear. So we have fear down here, shame, fear. We have love and enlightenment up here. For some people, when they get up here, the things that disappear into the mists below include things like sexual activity and relationships and wanting to go to parties and wanting to be social and beautiful clothes and a beautiful home or food and chocolate. But, see, here's the thing. Not everybody relates to chocolate as a sin. Not everybody relates to chocolate as something that is associated with a fear-based mentality. Some people do. Some people, when they're feeling in a lower, when they're in a lower state of vibration, when their consciousness is at the lower end of its spectrum for them, which corresponds to a lower emotional state. So maybe you're having a bad day, and if you're a person who says, I'm having a bad day, I need some chocolate, And that's when you crave chocolate. And especially if you're a person who then eats that chocolate and then says, oh God, I can't believe I ate that chocolate. I'm so terrible. I'm so fat. I'm so ugly. I'm so unhealthy. Ugh, I can never do anything right. If you're one of those people, which is like most people that I know, then you are relating to chocolate in a fear state, and if you become enlightened, then you lose chocolate. However, if you are a person who relates to the earth and to different things in a frequency of love, such as chocolate, maybe you don't judge yourself for your love of chocolate. You don't judge yourself for your relationship with the sugar that they put in it. You don't judge it. You don't feel or entertain any feelings of fear or shame about chocolate or sugar. Chocolate. Then chocolate gets to come with you when you awaken. You get chocolate. So all these people who are enlightened and are over sex, and they're over chocolate, and they're over wine, and they're over material possessions, they're over art, things like that, that's just them. That's just who they were in the first place. They were a person for whom, if they had their wildest dreams, the most peaceful version of themselves was a person who didn't have to think about or deal with sex, who didn't have to like think about food. It's just like not that interesting to them, and who want to just maybe sit in meditation and ponder the infinite wisdom of the universe. That is them. Whatever you're interested in, whatever you like, whatever you actually love, those things are part of your energy field that sit in the place of love. And so if you embark upon a quest towards enlightenment, which I encourage you to do, because you can do it. It's not just for monks in Tibet or I don't know who else. It's not just for people who are religious or spiritual. It's for atheists too. If you would like to do this, know that you will not necessarily, you don't have to, you're not going to lose the parts of you that you really love. You're not going to lose the parts of your relationship to the earth that you really love. If you love other humans, you're not going to lose your interest in being part of a family and part of a community. You don't lose that. If that is truly a part of the highest part of your soul, to be in community and to be in relationship, if you become enlightened, that part of you is there too. It's still there. You just have a different relationship with it, and you might have a very different understanding of those things, but it doesn't mean you lose those things. I'm just getting a little bit weirded out by, because I keep hearing so many different spiritual teachers talking about how you lose, you're gonna lose your sex drive if you get enlightened. And I'm like, oh my God, like stop telling people that, because some people appreciate having a sex drive or like being in a relationship or things like that. Like, it's like, I wouldn't, and this is, so everybody's version of enlightenment and awakening is going to be individualized exactly for you, because you're the only one who experiences the consciousness that is you. Your enlightenment, if you raise your consciousness and do different types of practices to do this, it is just a hyper more awesome version of you. And you might not even know which parts of you even like, and that's okay. Because to become enlightened is to begin to recognize and see, and it becomes in relief, what are the parts of me that I really do love? What are the parts of me that I love? And the things that fall away are implicitly and by definition things that you would want to fall away anyway. You just might not be able to say it or recognize it, but the things that fall away are not things that are individualized parts of you. You don't lose your sense of humor. If you have a sense of humor and you love to laugh and you think dirty jokes are funny, then, or just any jokes, I don't know about dirty jokes, and just any jokes, then the enlightened version of you is like so much funnier and has like sees everything as comedy. For me, I mean, I'm not sure how. I'm kind of confused as to how anybody enlightened doesn't see how humorous everything is. But I love that the Dalai Lama, he's like giggles all the time. And I get it now. I get what he sees. And you do just want to giggle. And I'm perplexed and like brokenhearted a lot of the time. And traumatized. I carry a lot of trauma. But like, there's a different way of looking at the world, and there's a different way of being. And when we're talking about consciousness and ascension, we're talking about raising the individual experience, the quality of life for the individual, such that the quality of life for the entire planet can change. Because if we can change, if we consciously change our perception of what is happening, and we are aligned with the collective, which we are moving towards more and more. And there are certain reasons as to why this would be happening right now, as opposed to like any other time in history. There are reasons as to why that's true, and it has to do with that reaction of the planet. And if you track all that stuff back, the reasons that it's happening would be happening now, that it's just easier for people to gain enlightenment. It's more accessible. We just had a day the other day that was like the fastest day or something, and supposedly there's no explanation for that. And no, there's an explanation. It's that the planet's, it's that consciousness is experiencing time quickening. This is the quickening. But all that has to do with is consciousness and the consciousness of the planet changing. And your individual experience as a tiny little, infinitely huge pinpoint of light within the electromagnetic field of the Earth. And so during this lifetime, this era, some people will not have the opportunity to raise their consciousness higher because of circumstances and various other things. But for everyone, the physiological capacity, it's much more easily, the awakening is much more easily attained right now, because of we are very close to this tipping point of the electromagnetic field gaining enough consciousness such that people just start joining the hive, what is going to be like a hive, and it's like a hive mind, collective unconscious. And it doesn't mean that we're all going to float away necessarily, unless that's part of your understanding of reality, in which case that's what your reality is going to do. If your understanding of reality involves Jesus coming to Earth, then guess what? Jesus is going to come to Earth. If your understanding of reality is only to do with like physical phenomena, then that's what's going to happen. Because you are programmed into the web and you are consciously experiencing it, and your being has a conscious understanding for the Earth of what is going to happen. And so, depending on who you are, what your background is, what your education is, what experiences that you've had, what information that you've been exposed to, your experience of enlightenment, of ascension, of how you understand the concept of ascension is going to be different. It's totally individualized. It's so freaking beautiful, because it doesn't have to be that everybody has the same interpretation. Because the way that the quantum works is through symbology, myth, legend, collective unconscious that's passed down, generational wisdom, this unconscious wisdom of our species, instincts. So, yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's something else that I want to add. There are many ways to raise your consciousness. And here's from my perspective, what I've identified as the single easiest way to think of it. What you need to do, okay, here you're going to be a detective, and you're going to start noticing which things make you feel scared and which things don't. I.e., which things give you a little pull, which things make you feel excited, which things make you feel a spark of love. So if everything is either fear or love, what you're doing is trying to calibrate your understanding of which things in my reality are love and which things are fear. And everything's going to be on this spectrum between fear and love. What you're doing is you're going to start noticing which things make you feel something closer to fear. And you're going to start training yourself to recognize it and don't do those things. Don't think those thoughts. Don't say the words. Don't click the link. Don't read the article. Don't read the book. Don't go to lunch with that person. Things that make you feel scared, feel fear, feel shame, things associated with even the tiniest twinge of shame of, if I didn't do this, then that's a fear-based way of justifying an action. But if you have a little zing feeling, and Marie Kondo is the best teacher for this. Marie Kondo, K-O-N-D-O, and she teaches organization, and she uses a lot of spiritual principles, and she simplifies this so beautifully. What sparks joy? You keep what sparks joy, and you release what does not. And that is all you are going to be doing. That is the single clearest way to find your path to enlightenment, to your ascension, to your nirvana, to your heaven. That is the way you do it. You are calibrated already coming in. You are a bilateral, dual system of good or bad. This thing is good or bad. Good for me, bad for me. Good for me, bad for me. And then we come up with all these creative ways of interpreting and imagining what that means. But really, it's just good or bad. But I don't want to talk about good or bad, because this is not about judgment. It's not. It's just about trusting that your body knows something that maybe the part of your brain that overthinks everything and has so much anxiety and has had a lot of experiences and difficult memories and has been suppressed for probably most of your life. You're going to override that part of you, and you're going to start paying attention to, does this make me feel fear, shame, or love? And remember, this is any thoughts, any action, any activity, any food, any impulse, any choice, any person, any conversation, a job, anything. A way of keeping your house? Is my room messy because I feel shame? Or is my room messy because I am artistic and like things to be unkempt? Or I just love to be able to get back in bed at any moment. Lots of luxurious, beautiful people keep their beds unmade. But in the Enlightenment community, the Ascension community, I also hear this narrative that you're supposed to have this spotless house with 0 possessions if you are one of enlightened people. And that's not true either. It's just that the people, and I'm not, no knock on those people. I've spent my life sort of wishing and thinking I was supposed to be one of those people. But, and I'm not saying hoarding is good either, but this is where you calibrate. It's like, what is love and what is shame? What am I keeping because of love? And what am I because it resonates with my soul? And what do I keep because of, what am I keeping because I feel guilty if I release it? Or have some kind of feeling of shame. So, but this you're gonna do for everything in your life. And that is how you start finding your way. And it gets brighter and brighter. It's easier and easier as you start doing this. You start recognizing that the choice, then you're going to start recognizing that the choices that you're making are feeding into this source of energy that you didn't, well of energy that's probably been empty for a long time, because we do not protect our energy whatsoever when we do things that cause us shame. We are letting the world leech our consciousness and leech our ability to attain these high levels of consciousness and ascension. And people don't even recognize how much we're being abused by society and the way that things are set up. Our energy is being mishandled, and we are put into a fear-based, shame-based society immediately in the West, at least where I'm from, and I'm pretty sure like most places in the United States are like this. Everything is fear-based, such that you don't even know that there's like a difference. You don't even know that there's a different baseline. You don't even know that our species is supposed to operate from a different baseline of consciousness. Life is supposed to feel better on a day-to-day basis for everybody, and that's not just people living in monasteries. That is quote-unquote householders, meaning women, children. Life is supposed to be better. Your experience of being a human is supposed to be better. Our bodies can do amazing things, and I just want y'all to know about it. I just want everybody to know about it. And you don't have to wear white clothes, but then you might realize that you kind of like the white clothes if you're like me. And that's what happened to me. I didn't used to do stuff like wear white clothes, and I would have thought I kind of seen this might be a little silly or like culturally appropriating or something. But in my own personal experience, this is like an aside, there's a thing about how white like reflects all energy, and I've found, and that's a lot of times why people in spiritual communities wear white, because it's a very positive, energetic way to sort of protect your spirit and not project any like sense of identity. And this goes for you too. Like if I'm going around my house in just white, I have a different experience of myself. And so that's why I started doing it. And I do like it, especially if I'm in a particularly spiritual place and trying to isolate and recalibrate and things like that. I love that. I really do love the white clothes, and looser fabrics too, for other reasons. But just makes your spirit feel better. We don't even know that we can feel our spirit, our like energy body. I didn't know that I could feel it. I learned to feel it. You can learn to feel yours too. And you can still be an atheist if you want to. You can still like Richard Dawkins, and then you can talk about, you know, space and stuff like that, and talk about freaking, it's like you've been like science fiction and becomes real, and whatever your favorite version of science fiction is, that's going to be what's real. So it's a little fantastical, but that's how the quantum works. Yeah, so, okay. I'm gonna hold up my beautiful Andara. This is my favorite one to clear our energy. Thank you. I'm Alice. I hope some of this resonated, and you can check out some of my other videos. My channel is called The Witch in the Glen, and it's not necessarily about witchy stuff, but I think everything can be about witchy stuff, just as any point in the universe is the center of the universe. And this is what my universe is going to be. So I can't wait to see yours. Thanks.